All right, as we will go ahead and get this next one started here. And again, another one I'm going to just step back and learn because I know nothing about all of this. I'm looking forward to seeing what the chat comes through because, as everyone may be aware, this esports thing is changing our industry a lot. And so I know I mentioned this the other day. It's like, hey, when we do our pep rally before the UCLA game and they bring up the football team, the basketball team, and the esports team, I'm like, okay, what the heck is going on? And they got totally just people screaming for them. So this was crazy. So I'm going to go ahead and say welcome to our panelists, and I'm ducking out. We got I have no audio.
Sorry, that was probably my fault.
There we go.
Hi again. My name is Donovan Monday. I'm from West Virginia University in Morgantown, West Virginia. I'm a network engineer here at West Virginia.
Hi, I'm Scott Tyner from Bates College. I think, like Joe, I'm not an expert on esports. Really interested in it. Really interested to hear some more and do some probing questions. And it looks like Josh is in a sweet gaming chair right off the bat. So what a start, huh?
Josh, you're muted.
All right, there we go. How's it going, everyone?
Yeah,
my name is Josh. I work at WVU Potomac State College. I'm the esports coordinator and the varsity head coach.
that's amazing because when we were talking about having this esports module and I started looking for subject matter experts and I looked through the NAC lineup and I saw West Virginia University, Potomac State. And being at West Virginia University myself, I seriously had no idea that you guys existed. So, and I'm sure you guys get that a lot being out where you guys are.
Yes.
Can you give us a little bit of background about how you got where you are?
Yeah, so I actually came from the traditional sports realm. All through college, I played rugby. Always a big video gamer. So I played Madden. That was my first game that I got competitive in. And I made top 200 leaderboards. And then I was like, oh man, I'm pretty good, I guess. So I found this game at college called League of Legends. A couple people in my dorm taught me about it. And so I joined in on the League of Legends team, actually. Played that while I played rugby for the last 2 years of my college career. Based off of that, I also worked in our intramural department at Central Michigan University. So I started the first ever big intramural gaming tournament at Central Michigan. So it actually still runs to this day. So on our first initial startup, we had 88 teams throughout our entire school sign up to play. And it was quite amazing. So there was something that I figured out that I wanted to do. So I interned at the University of Oregon, did the same thing out there. And then I went to the University of Central Florida, where I integrated the gaming for intramurals, but also I worked hand in hand with the club sports team. So after that, I made my way all the way out here to Potomac State College.
That's pretty cool. I also want to welcome Glenn Platt. Glenn, you're at Miami of Ohio University.
Correct.
And you guys have from what I've seen online, a pretty robust esports team, but you have a PhD in economics.
I do. You know, I wish I had gotten a PhD in what I do now, but back then, you know, you can tell the gray hair. It was a while ago. There weren't degrees in this kind of thing. So, you know, there was a migration from that. My PhD was from Carnegie Mellon. I had been doing a bunch of early work on the internet back then. And so there was sort of a natural sort of transition to tech. But yeah, the program that I'm the chair of, the department here is actually, it's about to change names to the Department of Emerging Technology, Business and Design. You know, we got about 1,000 students. Our game degree has recently, like a couple weeks ago, got ranked #1 in the country. We teach game design and game development.
You need to change that on your website because it still says #3.
It says, well, that's the Princeton Review ranking. That stays the same. So yeah, intelligent.com were the ones who said we were #1. I'll take #3 though.
Yeah.
We were the first Division I school to have a varsity esports team. Held the national championship in for NACE and Overwatch back in 2017. We got a handful of arenas here. I do some consulting work around esports with the U.S. State Department and some other folks as well. So I could kind of keep going, but that's, we're super, super active in the esports space. Happy to dive deeper into anything you would like to talk about.
I love the fact that we kind of have a beginning program at Potomac State, and you guys are just a year or two old, and you're talking about getting your gaming minor coming up. Is that correct?
Correct. So we're actually working hand in hand with WVU Morgantown.
And then we have an established program that's going on, and we've already got a chat going up. And one of the comments from Kane is, I grew up with my dad telling me it was a waste of time playing video games and no one could earn $1 playing video games. My kid is growing up, and for me telling my kid how to get better at Fortnite, this might help get a scholarship or leave to clear. That is a huge change in how people view gaming now. This is now when we're talking about gaming as a whole, the viewerships for League of Legends were better than Major League Baseball this year.
Yep.
And that's just viewership. That wasn't people playing. That was just people watching the game. So tell me how this is, first, I want to talk to Glenn first about this, is how has it impacted your enrollment and the students that you're getting on campus?
I think pretty significantly. I do a lot of work with other universities, sort of who are interested in building esports programs, and I think making the revenue argument is the wrong argument to make. I think ultimately there is a revenue story here with esports, but I think anyone who tells you you're going to be increasing revenue to the university because you're running a varsity esports team is lying to you. Like that, it's not there yet. I think it's the enrollment story that's the important one. I mean, look, this generation watches more esports on a weekly basis than all other traditional sports combined, right? So, there's the old saying, what was his name? Willie Sutton, the bank robber, right? Who they said, why do you rob banks? And he said, because that's where the money is. Why would you offer an esports program at your university? Because that's where the students are. I mean, that's where young people are. This is the language they grew up with. They spend time on Twitch. They're not spending time watching NBC. They're not opening your mailers that are all pretty and glossy that you send. And so, you need to meet students where they are. And so for us, that's what this is all about. I mean, our arenas are on the campus tour. Everyone who tours our campus sees our arena. And that is a very intentional thing because it's an important signal to send to someone who's 17 years old that you do this.
I'm wondering if I just jump in for a second, as I think of all our people who are listening. Could either Glenn or Josh, could you just talk about, like, what is esports? How does it work? How do you practice it? What does a competition look like? I think there's a lot of people who just don't really get, how do you turn video games into a competition or a sport? So if you just take a minute to tell us, what is that?
Josh, why don't you hit that one?
So esports at this point is kind of like a mass multiplayer video game. So most people, when they think about video games, some of them think about Mario Kart. Mario Kart can be an esports in a way, but not in this scene. So we're thinking bigger. So usually like League of Legends, Madden, things that can be very competitive, but also be played with multiple people across this platform from almost anywhere in the country or world. So do you have something, Glenn?
No. I'll tack on once you're done. Keep going.
So basically, I see esports as the most inclusive event out here right now in sports. It can take anyone from having injury or being illness to play esports and they can fit in. They don't have that physical exertion that is making them not be able to compete at the top of their game. So that's kind of how I see esports and why it's so popular and big at the moment.
That's a huge point. I never thought about that, how inclusive it can be.
Yep. Esports, put simply, is just competitive video game play. Any video game that has a competitive nature to it could be an esport. There is no there is no body that determines what is an esport and what is not. It gets determined solely by the number of people who play it. So there are what are called tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 esports, and those tiers are defined by the number of monthly active users or daily active users, as well as the prize pools. And so tier 1 esports, just like Josh is saying, like League of Legends, Dota, Overwatch, CSGO, Fortnite, which is sort of kind of an esport. You know, those games
Tell my son
have, you know, like the Dota prize pool was, what was it, Josh? Was it like $40 million this year for the, you know, so, you know, this is going to be in the Olympics as an exhibition sport in the next round. And I think it's inevitably going to be an actual Olympic sport.
I hadn't
I
heard
mean,
that one.
you know, the inevitability of this as a sport is already kind of locked in. Cities are building arenas, you know, Vegas, Philadelphia, other places. You know, it is, and to be, you know, what's interesting about what Josh said is sort of the range, right? Like the entry point for this is super low. Anybody can get in and can play and be good. But likewise, at the top level, the players who are competing, you know, and making millions of dollars, even the players that are getting scholarships at our universities, when we offer scholarships or other esports programs are offering scholarships, they are like freaks of nature good. So, you know, there's this sense that, gosh, you know, my kid plays this game, he's pretty good at it. You know, it's kind of like saying I'm pretty good at football and I'm going to go to the university and play for the team. Like pro esports players, StarCraft, which is the most complex of them, pro esports players in StarCraft take 600 individual actions per minute. I mean, it is the people who are good, it's games of microseconds. Like, I mean, it really is an incredible thing to see. And so you've got this great range where everybody can engage and everyone can spend time doing it. And everyone can get on Twitch, and Josh can be a broadcaster on Twitch just as much as PewDiePie is a broadcaster, or, you know, any pro esports player. Like there's a level playing field. So the engagement space here is giant.
What I've also saw a little bit, and I think that it goes back to that inclusion point, is that we're not talking about major universities in huge urban areas. I mean, when we talk about Josh, where he is, you know, Potomac State in Kaiser, West Virginia, which is pretty rural by all accounts. You can't get there from here. So, you know, that's not, you know, these are things that are they drawing people to those smaller colleges and maybe some of these rural places that wouldn't normally go there? Or is this simply just because everyone at that level now is some level of, you know, has some experience, or, you know, how is that working with recruitment? Josh, maybe you could talk to that.
Yeah, so I actually recruited, especially our League of Legends team and our Fortnite team. I outside of the state recruited for every single member. Most of these guys would have never even heard of Kaiser, West Virginia, until I actually went out and sought them. So it's really big. Most of my students, they actually never thought about going to college. They were just going to be kind of freelancing with esports, trying to make it pro, trying to make into a competitive scene just from home. So for me to be able to give them a scholarship, get schooling, and then also compete at a really high level was something that they never dreamed about until they got here. So
yeah.
it's very easy for most of these guys. Like he said, the top percentile, that 1% in the world, they really don't need to go to school in order to compete at the highest level of gaming. So it's really big for us to be able to give them a place where they can compete and feel like they're improving on a day in and day out basis. And I think the biggest thing right now that I kind of teach my kids is that, you know, the pro scene isn't set yet. You can get there and lose your job the next day, and then you have nowhere to go. So come get your education and then grow and make it there. And if they ever come to the point where you get cut from a team, you don't have to worry about never being able to find a job right after.
Are these kids that are coming to your programs, are they, you know, are these CS kids? Are they going into, you know, computer-based degrees, or do you have a plethora of
No.
so wide range.
Everything. Our best player last year was a pre-med major. Yeah, and they're just or everything.
Interesting.
Yes.
What do the competitions look like? Are you competing against other colleges? Are you competing against the entire universe of gamers? What does that look like?
From our standpoint, we do both. So we compete against other colleges in these college sanctioned tournaments. But then outside of that, when we want to look for better competition, we go outside. So there's like little makeshift semi-pro leagues for different games that we compete in. So we compete in a league called Arisen, where they have challenger players where we can practice basically with those guys since we're around that area. The huge thing about college right now is that the level of competition is very well, not set at the moment. So some schools might have really good teams while other schools are kind of at the mediocre standpoint. So we really want to make sure that we can keep on improving and reach out to different places to do so.
Okay.
Yeah, it is it is literally the Wild West right now in college, right? So the NCAA isn't going to touch this with a 10-foot pole, not for a while. And so, to your earlier question, like Harrisburg, which is a super competitive school right now in league, is in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, and recruited basically a bunch of semi-pro players to come there, right? There's so this is a collegiate sport that you can recruit pro players for. Like there is no rule against recruiting a pro player. There are no rules about students making money. So when Josh talks about competing in collegiate and non-collegiate sanctioned events, a lot of those events are actually cash prize, win real money, and your players can actually win actual money kind of events. And so, there's definitely a very kind of wild feel to the competitive space. And I'd sort of just punctuate that by saying something again that Josh said quickly earlier, and I want to emphasize it. Like if you want to play esports as a pro, you would never go to college and then go pro. If you're that good, you probably would go pro first. That players peak in terms of their cognitive abilities, depends who you want to argue with, but somewhere between 17 years old and 20 years old. That I think by the time you graduate college, you're probably starting to decline in literally your ability to play the game, that there are just physical things happening to you. And so, it's a very, very different kind of environment. I do want to address one comment here too. Someone asked about shoutcasting, because I think that's an important thing to bring up here.
Yeah, we've got some great questions on the chat here. So
for us, and I suspect it's the same case for you, Josh, so feel free to jump in here, but like once you start doing esports, so we're building out at the moment, we'll be launching shortly an esports management degree. So a degree in how to do the business side of esports. And the people who want to start engaging in that, you start to realize there are other portions of the university that are interested in this. So broadcasting used to be like your comm departments and your broadcast departments were television, radio, and film, which of course is still a thing, but isn't quite a thing the way it once was. And so those departments, as part of modernizing and what they do, they can engage with your esports team by providing the casting help. And your kinesiology and health and sports leadership folks can do the research on sleep patterns and health and diet and all those other things that your sports players need. And the marketing department's going to get involved because right now, I'm talking with a Fortune 50 brand right now that wants to shift a bunch of their marketing towards esports because they know that's the audience and this is the only way to get in front of them. So I think you can build things that bring in the whole university on the subject of esports. And so casting is just one of those where you can engage your communication folks.
Yeah, definitely. Almost every single day, I can honestly say that I have someone around campus or coming into campus that wants to be involved with the program. And they said, "Oh, wow, you don't have my game and I'm not the greatest at these games, but just tell me how I can help." And it's from all these different avenues. And that's the big thing, since we have so many students that come into these programs that aren't just computer science majors or
Yeah,
computer
definitely.
information majors. So I have a girl who loves fashion. So she's actually making a costume right now. So she can go, when we go to DreamHack, she's going to present this costume and try to win it. So it's so amazing of all the talent that we can get and so many different avenues that you can take right now in esports.
That's incredible. Are you guys getting corporate sponsorships, or is that a big part of what you guys do in your programs, or is that something where all of your funding is coming from the university?
So for us, we started with university funding. We're now shifting more towards corporate and actually alumni gifts. We're negotiating a large gift from an alum, hopefully soon, for scholarships. But you bring up an interesting point that those of us who do esports are not marketing and promotions experts, and so while we do have corporate sponsorship, I think most esports programs I know really suck at getting those sponsorships. We don't have the experience, the mechanism, the channels. I think it's a real opportunity missed, because that's just not in our sort of square target zone.
I wonder if you could tell us, and this is one of the questions in the chat. Tell us about your facilities. What does an arena look like versus a practice area? Most of the people listening here are somehow involved in AV, and so I'd be interested to know what kind of AV is involved in those facilities.
Josh, you want to hit that? I'm going to find a link here that I'll include in the chat. So go
Yeah,
ahead.
I can hit that first. So practice arena. So kind of how you see in my background right here, all these different computers. So this is kind of more of our practice space that we use. This is where we can isolate ourselves from the rest of the community and really get down to the nit and grit of the game. At this point, I know someone asked in the chat about how many hours that we spend and things of that sort of nature. I open our arena from 12 p.m. to, 12 p.m. to 12 a.m. This way, I allow our students to come in whenever they want between classes to get some extra practice in. But then I also set a time, classroom time, so they have to have study hall. We do that twice a week. So we try to make sure that we stay up in our higher education. But for computer wise, we actually, in our practice arena, we run 2080s, and we also run i9 processors. So that's kind of really big and kind of out of the way for what any esports is running at the time. But that's kind of just what our administration want to do. They want to go all out so we can attract the bigger students. And then for our actual game, we set up in a different place. This way we allow, since esports is kind of like a spectator sport at the same time, we allow people to actually see our game being played live. So we'll broadcast it via Twitch, but then we'll also put it up so people can actually come and watch in person. And then we usually bring down an overhead so that the game is being played. Now, every so often, depending on the level of play, we have a shoutcaster. So we have one for League of Legends and we have one for Rocket League. But for our Fortnite team, Fortnite's very hard to spectate at the moment. So we kind of stay away with actually showing people our event there.
Yeah, the cool thing about esports facilities is there's a whole range you can do, right? So the entry point to get into esports, if you wanted to get your university into esports, is relatively low. I mean, it's the word arena always throws people off. I mean, we're just talking about a computer lab, and so a fairly high-end computer lab with 10 computers could, in theory, be your starting point. I mean, a team for most of these sports is 5 or so players, and if you want alternates, so that would be a minimum. I think ideally you'd want enough machines so 2 teams could compete within a room, but we have sort of the highest end Alienware computers we can get. So that matters because, as I said, it's a game of microseconds, and so it does matter having really high-end computers. The other thing that matters is bandwidth and access to the network. So to the extent that you can get onto the backbone of your university or have a dedicated network path out of the university, it makes a difference. I sort of had a long conversation with the folks at UC Irvine about what they do, and I would encourage you to reach out to them if you want to sort of hear more of the network details of what they did. But they had to create like a sandbox path so that their room could go directly out to the, without having to go through, you know, all of the, are you downloading BitTorrent filters and all the other filters that universities put on these things, because any hiccup in the server is going to screw up your gameplay. So you need to create kind of a dedicated path for doing that. We have an arena that's just for our varsity players. We have 2 more arenas we're building this summer. One that's sort of an open cafe to all students, and then one that's going to be kind of a hybrid. You're going to probably want some kind of casting space or ability to cast, and it just depends on, you know, what you got going on. At the highest end, I'm putting a link here in the chat to Boise. Boise has, their space is just amazing. Yeah, it's very kick-ass. They invested heavily, right? And so this Twitter post has a little video that takes like 30 seconds to watch, and it's just walking through their spaces, and they did a really nice job with that. So that's the range, right? It could just be a room basically, or it can be kind of all the way up to what Boise State's got.
Yeah. And then,
go ahead.
oh, based off what Glenn's saying, so of course the computers really make a big difference, but you want to make sure you have the peripherals as well. So the mouse and the keyboards and the headphones, those things can be a huge factor in how the game's being played. Certain people have certain mouses that they like.
Yeah.
Do you have headphones? Are they soundproof? Are they picking up every single noise that's in your background so that these players can't actually hear what's going on in the game? So those are the little things that happen. Now, once this gets bigger, some IT departments at some schools aren't going to want to touch your equipment. Esports, it kind of scares them at the moment. I know with Morgantown, they actually set aside a straight bandwidth lane that our computers in our lab does not interfere with any internet across all of our campuses. They set it up over summer because they were afraid that how much bandwidth we were using was going to take over and override way too many things. The next thing is our IT department doesn't really like our computer so much because it's so high techy and different.
Right, they do. Yeah.
they don't want to touch them. So if anything actually goes wrong with our computers at this moment, I'm the only one that can fix them. So you want to make sure that if your IT department isn't going to bring someone be on board with your program, bring someone on board who does know the IT side of things, just in case something happens to your CPUs.
Yeah, we got a question about that actually on a question on the Q&A, which was, you know, do you use standard desktop support like SSCM or, you know, CC boot or those kind of things? So I think you answered that one.
Yeah, you can't, I mean, the university image isn't going to work. There also are issues related to buying things in game. Like a lot of universities don't allow for certain types of installs or downloads that come from Steam or other places like that. So you really need, you know, an exception made for this space to work. I'd also, someone asked about the life cycle for these. We've got a 2-year, you know, we're probably stretching it a bit, but we figure if we buy top of the line, 2 years would probably be good enough for us to do what we need to do.
Wow. So there was a question about from the AV perspective, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday in the AV over IP session that we had, which was, you know, everything was about latency and making sure that everything was done with the lowest latency possible.
Right.
For the arenas, and you're having displays up around your room for people to watch and the viewership, how important is that interaction with the audience as opposed to the actual player themselves?
From my standpoint, the audience cares a little bit more about the game being played itself than more about the players. So traditional sports, you want to see LeBron James on the court dribbling the ball up and down. Well, for us, they don't really care if I have a player cam on me. They want to see what my player does actually in the game, which is more important for all those fans.
Yeah, agreed.
From an AV standpoint, from we're talking about building out and Scott could probably talk to this too, because we're in a similar size school, or he's in a much smaller size school than we are. When you talk about bringing people there and building out an event space for this, what are the things as coaches and as people who are building these programs, what are you looking for from your AV department to say, this is going to be a marquee place, this is going to be a place I can bring my kids in to say, this is awesome?
Boy, I mean, so when we say AV, are you including IT in like just all sort of AV and technology, or
Sure.
just video and audio kind of stuff?
I think for our group, it's probably more the video and audio things.
You know, boy.
I mean, do we have to go all the way to what Boise State did, or is there somewhere else that?
I do think, like, one piece where I don't think we have done as much as we could have, because we didn't bring our AV people in early. They weren't really part of the process of building our program, is the kind of large stitched together multi-monitor walls. Those are pretty common in esports spaces. So and having a place for people to view competition, some collegiate esports doesn't allow for anybody to be in the room while the players are playing, right? They're having a viewing space that is large format, as well as a performative space that has screens behind the players. So a really common setup for sort of finals of major competitive events is to have, 2 teams of 5 separated on the stage of a auditorium-ish type of space. And then behind them is a very large sort of wall of monitors that has different content on it, and then 2 giant monitors that are sort of broadcasting out to the people who are in the audience to see the actual gameplay, the stuff Josh was talking about. Like, in an ideal world, if budget were no issue, that kind of a setup would be great. I mean, at the minimum level, you could put 2 giant TV screens in your arena and have your coach just, go through the VODs and say, here, let's talk about what you did on a TV screen. Like, I don't think you need a ton of AV to get in the door with this.
Yes, definitely. I honestly really think it depends on what size school you are and where you're located, to be honest. So for something like us, we would never want to be Boise State in a sense, just because it doesn't fit our demographic of the town around us. But like something of a bigger school, you can go all out on those things. So like Ohio State University, they can make that bigger stage, put all those equipment out there because the school itself really supports it. The students are going to show up and go to these events and cheer it on like it's an actual traditional sporting event. Harrisburg University, they don't do anything fancy, so all their equipment actually is removable. So they set up in a kind of like a theater. They bring out 2 different portions so they can have a team on one side and a team on another side. And right in the middle is just this projector that puts on the screen of what's happening in the game. And then kind of sat down lower on the stage are the commentators who are doing all the shoutcasting. So it really, on any difference, just depends on, does your school support it? Does it meet your niche? Because if it does, then you're good. But if it doesn't, you don't want to waste your money on something that you can put towards anything else.
Yeah, Christopher in the chat just mentioned something I think is important to emphasize too, which is one of the cool things about esports spaces is they can be multi-purpose. Like you can break it down and use it as just a theater or to have talks in it. It's not like it's a dedicated basketball floor. And so you can create a lot of usage, at least for those kind of competitive, audience-based types of events. That kind of a space, like what Josh is describing, right? It can have a whole lot of different uses. So it might be an easier sell than building a dedicated performative space.
Curious to know how each of you are organized as far as where do you fall? Do you fall in athletics? Do you fall in intramurals? I think, Josh, you might have touched on that at the beginning.
Yes. So every place that I've been to so far has been outsourced from somewhere else. So when I came to Potomac State, we were actually part of student affairs. And then recently, once the semester kind of began, we moved over to athletics. Now we are in athletics right now, but kind of our athletics department doesn't really know what to do in the realm of esports. So it's really just myself. So actually, we are now probably in the process of moving back over to student affairs because it's really tricky, honestly. Even though esports is so big, there's so much that isn't known to some of these people from traditional sports that it kind of scares them to really put their hand in the pot and try to figure out what happens.
Where do you guys think it should live? Do you think it should live with the athletic department, or do you think it should live with the engineering department? Do you think it should live with student affairs? Where do you guys think this should land?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up some stats I had in a presentation about it. I'll just pull this up while Josh is talking in a minute, but I've got the stats on where esports lives across the percentages across those three spaces. But there is no one answer to that. We're in academic affairs. I think it depends on your university culture. I think in the big schools, I think generally your athletics programs are not going to want to mess with you. You know, they're NCAA, they're worried about Title IX, they don't understand what esports is, they're physically separated from campus. There's a lot of reasons why I think athletics gets more problematic the bigger the university gets.
Is it just because we call it esports and not something else that we think of it that way, or is it something else?
No.
It's a varsity sport, you know?
Yeah.
It's just they are athletes and they need to be treated as athletes. They should be able to register for courses early. They get all of the benefits and perks that athletes get. You know, I think for this to be treated the way it ought to be treated, it should feel like a varsity football team with all of the things that come with that.
Kind of how we touched the reasoning. It's not really the name behind esports. It's more of what esports stands for. So how the NCAA isn't really getting their hands put in the pot here is because most of these players at these schools can earn money as they play. Even the tournaments that we enter in, there are like scholarship prize pools at the end of the day that can be taken and given straight back to the students. So now you're talking about our student athletes are able to be paid to play while the football team isn't. So that's really where things come into a category of why these bigger athletic programs don't want to touch esports at the moment. Next, when we talked about the question of where should it be housed, it's really just where at your school you feel it personally fits in. I think personally that you always need just one person, a director who is going to only have the job of running your esports program if you want to succeed. If you have someone who's running multiple things on campus plus esports, you're not going to get what you want out of the program. It's impossible. It is a day-to-day grind with recruiting, making sure everything is up to date, keeping these students' grades at the highest of levels. It is an athletic department all on its own. So in a sense, it does belong in athletics, but right now it doesn't fit there because athletics isn't ready for esports. So if you're going to start a program, put someone who's in charge who's going to be strictly for esports, and then work your way that way.
So I've got the numbers here. This is from the last time NACE, the National Association of Collegiate Esports, and I'm going to come back, put a pin in that. I want to talk about them for a minute, but about 43% are in student affairs, about 14% are in academics, and about 42% are in athletics. So, and they come out of student affairs because I would say all esports at the collegiate level grows out of club teams. Like before there was a varsity thing, it was all about clubs, and clubs exist in student affairs. And so there's just a historical dynamic that places it in student affairs. I think each of these three things comes with its own problems. Being in student affairs has budgetary implications that are a little complicated, scholarship issues. I mean, there's other, they all have their pros and cons for sure. I did want to talk about NACE because I think there's an interesting this sort of Wild West piece of it that Josh was talking earlier about the tournaments we play in, there is no league. There's no NCAA. There's a bunch of folks like NACE and other things like NACE that are trying to establish themselves as kind of the de facto NCAA, but the fact is no one has. And so at this point, part of that coaching thing is you've just got to get your team out everywhere, right? And you've got to figure out where are the tournaments and where do you want to play and how do you play. There is no coordination, like zero coordination in this space right now. And I'll also echo Josh's point about having dedicated people for this. Like that's kind of everything. Like our players have physical training time where they're out running laps and doing reaction ball training. We need to be advising them about their classes. We need to be out recruiting. Like if we didn't have a full-time person behind it, there's a ceiling that you've built into what you're going to be able to do, just because there's not, that person who's running it won't have bandwidth to do everything you need to do.
Now, do you see this ever moving towards, like we're Big 12, you guys are MAC, having those kinds of associations where, all the Big 12 schools have a esports tournament or the MAC schools have an esports tournament? Do you see that kind of thing happening, or is it still going to be done on an outside conference level?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel 100% confident that every single one of those groups, the MAC, the Pac-12, I mean, all of them are having conversations right now about this. I am 100% sure of it. I know people in those groups. I know they're having these conversations. Some are actually pretty far down the road. Here's the problem with that. Esports is not a regional game, right? So for a lot of these conferences, it's about these kind of historic rivalries and regional competition, and the geography matters. In esports, geography does not matter. It's part of the problem the Overwatch League is struggling with, is because when you create these franchises around geography, people's allegiance isn't to where you live, it's to the team that you identify with, the players and their values and that type of thing. And so being tethered to any conference the way that traditional big conferences do, I think you're going to have a hard sell with a lot of varsity esports teams, because I may want to play against Josh's team because they're the best team that's out there, and beating them is far better than beating a team that's in my conference and is crappy, right? So I think the constraints of a traditional conference will be somewhat problematic, but I know that the conferences are playing. I mean, this is the Wild West thing. Everyone's trying to create a league at this point.
So you don't see the traditional things like, growing up, in West Virginia, we always wanted to beat Pitt. So you don't see the same kind of things where a kid who wants to grow up and be a, play for WVU esports isn't necessarily going after the same kind of rivalries.
Yeah,
Correct.
I mean, no, they don't.
So like us, for example, like when I came here, there's no historical background for the school. There's no club team. I built my entire team from scratch. So now when we get into these conferences play, even when I was at Central Michigan and my job was proposed, the esports program, they just announced now that they are making a facility space for it with the MAC. So they were talking with the MAC. Like a couple of weeks ago, I got called from Georgetown University, and they're trying to get all the Power 5 schools together so that they can make a conference. But the big thing is for my League of Legends team, I don't care if we beat Georgetown. I want to beat Maryville University. Why? Because they won the championship 4 years in a row. So I want the big dog in esports. Now, the big thing about making all these conferences is smaller schools at the moment dominates esports. We're talking about your Maryville. We're talking about your Robert Morris, Harrisburg University. Those schools are the top notch, not the Big Ten, not the Power 5. So for us, we want to take on the best of the best, like Glenn said, and it just so happens that a regional and at a higher level isn't really at those D1 universities right now. It's at the smaller ones.
For now, yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that those students went there and not into a D1 school?
My theory is that the really big D1 schools, their athletics departments are powerhouses. They run those universities, and those athletic departments see esports as a threat generally, or they just don't understand it, and or they're worried about their NCAA standing, or other things. I think it's the size of the athletics programs that prevent it from happening at the moment. I do think that will change. I don't know, Josh, what do you think?
No, I completely agree. Each esports for athletic department is literally their worst nightmare at this point in time. They will try to stay away from it as far as possible, and it's really like we're saying, it's the NCAA, and it's the same thing that happened with League of Legends being broadcast on the Big Ten network. The prize pool from Riot Games actually nullified the contract with Big Ten and those schools. So that's kind of where it's happening at the moment. Once
And
we
that,
finally, oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead, please.
Yes. So once we finally find a solution, or Riot Games isn't going to change. Let's be honest here. They make millions of dollars, and they will take the small schools who will compete in their tournaments and be good and won't care about you big D1 universities. So it's really going to be with maybe the NCAA trying to figure out and like an even ground to really negotiate with these bigger gaming publishing companies who control the entire league.
Right. And, Sam in the chat just made a comment that I think is also a reason that we see esports often showing up where it is in the small schools. They're more agile, right? I mean, Harrisburg is a building, right? I mean, I think they have 500 students. It's an incredibly small school. And so it is easy for them to do it, and it can be a distinguishing feature for them. And as small schools are struggling right now, I mean, all schools are struggling right now for enrollments and facing the threats that higher ed are facing. I think there's more interest in being creative around what you do than the big schools, which, Ohio State's going to get people going there whether they do esports or not. I do want to address another comment from the comments about intellectual property, because that actually is pretty important in this space. So all of these games are owned by companies. You don't get to do whatever you want with them. So if you cannot independently say, I'm going to have a League of Legends tournament, then we're going to give away $10,000 to the winner. Well, maybe 10, I think you can do. There's some dollar limit. Is it 20? I think it's 20.
Yeah.
But, you need permission from the game publisher to have a tournament. And moreover, the publisher has complete IP control of the game itself. So imagine if football could raise the goalposts halfway through the season. That happens in esports all the time. All the time. They'll change the rules, they'll change the way the game plays. And so, intellectual property drives esports, absolutely drives it. And it's the primary reason I think NCAA doesn't want to mess with it. And so you have to be mindful of it, the licensing that's involved, how you do tournaments, your relationships with these publishers. They all have collegiate outreach groups, but it is an important issue, and I think it was brought up in the chat. I just think it needs to be said here too.
Well, that's amazing. It's actually something I'd really kind of never considered. I'm wondering from both of you, so as Donovan had mentioned, a lot of us are AV people, IT people. And one of the comments from Michael here in the side chat was that his organization is keeping esports in IT. And I'm wondering what both of you think. What is the role of IT? Are we do we support you? Do we advise you? Where do we fit in with what you need to do?
For me personally, I really wish for our IT department to be more of a supportive cast in what we can do, just because simply they have a lot more things going on, and they don't want to probably keep up with the esports space and everything that's happening. So for myself, if I can come to them and be like, hey, this is what's happening, this is what we're going to need over this lifespan, and see if they can help us out, that is more reasonable and accessible in my situation, just to have my IT department as a support rather than them telling me what to do and I'm more qualified and dedicated to the space.
I mean, for us, we've been really lucky, and give a very public shout out to our VP for IT, David, and the IT support people. They've been fantastic for us and critical partner. Our IT organization bought all of our gamer chairs. You need gamer chairs in your gamer lab, like you see Josh sitting in right there. That was bought and paid for by our IT folks as part of a sort of contribution to help us do what we do. You know, they're involved in, as we're doing the engineering specs for new arenas that we're building, they're involved in those conversations. I mean, they're critical partners in this, both AV and IT. You know, getting them in early with the planning, I think is super, super important. You know, and I think it's probably got a bit to do with our scale. You know, we have 19,000 students. We're a much bigger school. You know, I imagine in Josh's school, the IT organization is smaller. You know, you ideally don't want to do what Josh is doing, which is doing your own IT support, right? Like he shouldn't be opening boxes and putting in memory, right? Like that isn't the highest and best use of him. And so I do think they're absolutely a critical partner in a way that any other sport would never have.
Yeah, because I think often, I mean, I'm from a smaller school, and I think that what we'd see is when people start thinking about esports or students come to them with questions about esports, they're going to first turn to the IT department. There's this kind of natural reaction of, well, it's computers. You must know something about this. And so I think it's helpful for everybody and all of the attendees today to think about, okay, where do I direct it? I can support this, but where do I help direct to get the support that somebody like Josh actually needs to run his program?
And just because we have an IT help desk doesn't mean they know what the qualifications are for an esports terminal. You know, we put out PCs every single day that are just, you know, 50 at a time boxes, but they're not going to have nearly the same kind of specs as what you would want for an esports terminal.
Yeah, I think putting in an IT would be a dangerous thing to do. You know, IT organizations don't know how to recruit. I mean, right? Because esports has to recruit people. It has to advise them on what they do. It has to coach an esports organization. It needs to raise money from corporate and, you know, alumni donors. Right? These aren't things IT organizations are remotely prepared to do. So I think finding a champion on campus often, like I do think most of the schools I've talked to, it's evolved out of a club team, you know, and so see if your school has a club team, find the president of your club team, find out who's the advisor for that club team, and then, you know, activate them as your champions to advance this with the administration. I just think you're going to be far more successful. If you pigeonhole this as an IT play, you're sort of losing the sport piece of esports. You're just doing the E.
Yeah, it's funny because Christopher Nito just posted about, you know, the model may shape up as a European soccer teams playing traditional leagues, but get invited to national cups and championship leagues and those kind of things. Do you see that model working out for esports? Where you have your traditional
Josh,
leagues?
you want to hit that?
Or is it really just about who's on top right now and that's who we're after?
It's so new and tricky right now. Like I can go to the League of Legends scene. You know, we have the competitive pros, which are your 0.001% in the world, right? And then under them, they are making this kind of academy team, which is like the NBA G League. Well, for League of Legends, at least, the NBA G League format that they're trying to implement is very rusty and inconsistent and not producing the way that they want it to produce. So a big thing that could happen here in the nearby future is that we can get those collegiate leagues to finally be formalized and actually be a great input, almost like an NBA draft for these professional teams. Because a professional team would much rather take players who have competitive experiences and being in a team format and working with others rather than having someone who plays at their home all the time who doesn't compete in that same environment. So there is the semi-pro league. The semi-pro league at the same level isn't structured completely yet. So we have a lot of leaps and boundaries to go in esports at the moment to really get to a place where we can solidify and be like, hey, this is here, we're here to stay, and this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, you know, there are times where it's easy to talk about this like we talk about traditional sports, and other times that it's just so different that model just doesn't make sense. And this is one of them. I mean, look, any league that's going to have to happen or organization is going to need to be sponsored ultimately, or at least sanctioned by game publishers. That's the only way a league's going to happen. So that in and of itself is crazy complicated. And then you've got the fact that the games change. So the publishers change, right? So, 3 years ago, we were not having a Fortnite conversation. And 3 years from now, we will be talking about other games from other publishers that aren't part of that. So like the consistency of a European soccer league, that isn't going to happen. There won't be a consistency of games that are being played. There won't be a consistency of publishers. I ultimately think the only solution that's probably going to make sense is some sort of cross-university, national sort of set of agreements, right? That this is how you can recruit players, whether or not they can keep the money. Like, we'll come up with a broad set of agreements, and then game publishers will plug into that at some point. I think anything other than that will just be dynamic. It'll come together and it'll fall apart.
Are we looking at something that's going to be sustainable long term? Is this going to be a fixture now as it grows forever, or is this something that's hot right now and not going to be in 20 years?
Hard to really say. Like if you think of, there's certain games right now that Riot Games, they only can produce one video game at the moment. And it's been around for 10 years and it's still at the top of the food chain. And now they're actually trying to produce more. But you see games like Fortnite, I'm honestly, in my opinion, the next 3 to 4 years here, you probably won't see many people playing Fortnite anymore. And that's just based off the game itself, the publisher, and the dynamic of the gaming world. It changes drastically. A new hot game can come out tomorrow and it can pick up steam and it can roll for the next year or two, and out of nowhere, it can drop to the bottom of the shelf. So it's really hard to say.
I think if you want to get super futurist on this stuff, I think I don't think esports is going anywhere. I think the way it's played will probably change in some significant ways. I think AR and VR will ultimately be the space in which esports competition will take place. I think we're gonna look back on thinking about mice and monitors as being very old school.
I mean, are we moving to a Ready Player One kind of model?
I mean, 20 years from now, yeah. Right.
Okay.
Not in the near future, not in sort of the cycle that you all are buying computers for and building arenas. I would never build an esports arena for VR. But I think it's inevitable. It will be a thing. It's just not there yet.
Oh man, a VR arena. That's crazy.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
Scott, in your university, are you hearing anything about this? I mean, unfortunately for me, and I feel awful about this, but I didn't even know that Josh was where he is, and we're part of the same organization. In your university, are you getting anything like this?
So we have a club team, as they mentioned that most people do. Our club team has poked a few people in the sense of some of the same questions Josh and Glenn are asking. How do we get direct connection to the internet where we're not going through a firewall and getting some of the latency issues? How do we get wired connections set up in the space that we want to be at? So we're starting to hear some of that. Interestingly enough, there's a community college just across the river from where we are in Lewiston, Maine. They've put in a practice area, and they've done a lot of this stuff. So we have visited them and talked with them about it. But it's really that piece of, I think we're still struggling with where do they go to really get what they need and get the support they need to start to really build a program, because there's still that piece. And I'm sure Josh and Glenn have to deal with it all the time of, yeah, these guys are playing video games. Come on. Tell them to go study or tell them to go out on the court. They're playing video games. And so I think that there's that getting by that with a lot of people is a struggle at some places, especially a place like Bates, which is an academic institution, one of the top 25 liberal arts in the college, in the country. So really getting people to understand the value of these programs. And I don't mean financial value. I mean what students get out of them.
Well, I think that's go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, because I think you're right. Josh I'm sure will nod with me as I say this. There's a set of questions you always get asked. You always get, this is not a sport, right? That's one you always get. So then you need to talk about calories burned, because there is actually research on this. Like, it is not a sedentary activity. They burn a significant amount of calories. Our athletes do physical training, so you got to explain that, right? Then you've got to explain video games don't cause violence, because they don't. There's a ton of research on this. Like, there is no question on this matter, but you need to do that. Then you get to hear them say, well, let me get this straight. Lots of people sit around and watch people play video games, and then you need to remind them that they sit around and watch people play golf games and sports games and that kind of, I mean, it is an endless repeating cycle of these defenses, and you need to be prepared with that. You need to have like all that evidence. You know, one argument that seems to work well for what it's worth is, if you're trying to find something for your students to do other than binge drink and get into trouble, this is a great thing to do, right? You build these spaces because they could be 24/7 spaces that, I mean, when you look at the big esports arenas, they're occupied a lot. It's a social space, like the public esports arenas, not the varsity ones. And so, you know, this is a play for getting your students engaged in safe behavior, in community and collaborative behavior. Particularly Asian students actually congregate quite a bit in esports arenas. You know, I think there are those kind of arguments around building the student life aspect of this.
Well, when you look at, you know, Disney Channel, you know, they promote the Overwatch League, you know, World Championships. They did the Nintendo World Championships. ESPN is broadcasting. CBS Sports is broadcasting. These are now major networks and primetime real estate that is being taken up with esports. And, you know, esports scholarships have gone up 480% over the last year. And we now have over 100 colleges that have esports programs in the US and Canada. Do you guys, are either one of you offering scholarships in your programs?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Scholarships are going to drive and get you your best players that you want, especially those ones that didn't think they were going to come and compete at the college level.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we've been talking about Harrisburg, right? Harrisburg offers, I mean, their team's all full ride scholarships, and that is the recruitment strategy. They go through the pro roster, and they offer full ride scholarships. Do you have to have them to have a team? No. I mean, you totally could have a team by just recruiting your best esports players that are even on campus already. You know, I think that's the beauty of how tiered this whole space is. Like, you could still compete and have fun and engage. If you want to be top, you know, 1%, top 5, even these days, I'd say top 20% of varsity teams, you're going to need some sort of scholarship.
We're going to have to wrap up here pretty soon. I want to get to a couple more questions. When you're starting your club teams, was it all about bring your own device, or did the school actually make an investment in having a lab set up for this?
At every institution that I've been at until this moment, it was bring your own device for clubs, just because most of the institutions at that point in time didn't really believe in esports and setting up a space for esports. And probably for, you know, some of you institutions that don't know how big your esports program is, I would just go and look for your club, because they are probably doing open LAN tournaments throughout the semester where they're bringing in computers, or they're actually letting outside people come in and compete with the same experience. So once you can see how big your own club is at your school, that will give you a starting point to say if you want to expand and grow into your own arena.
That's great. Dusty has an interesting question, and maybe Glenn can speak to this. Is when you're creating your spaces, what are the mistakes and pitfalls to avoid? I know for us in IT, I have it really lit up right now because we're on video conference, but usually my lights are very low. Is that something that you have to kind of work out? Like, okay, we need to take bulbs out of the ceiling, we need to block stuff off. What are those considerations that you have?
Lighting is certainly a consideration. I think the biggest mistake to address that first is not thinking about HVAC. That these machines throw off a ton of heat, and so you probably need some special HVAC infrastructure. Not just people always think about network infrastructure, but not the other parts. And so the other thing would be soundproofing spaces because they can get louder than they might otherwise be. So that would be an important thing to think about. Those two come to mind immediately.
And I guess from Joe, who is our fearless leader, we have to ask his question. So, is there an ROI in giving scholarships? Are you seeing a return, like from a donor standpoint, from funding standpoint, on giving scholarships for esports?
Yes and no. So for us, the donors aren't really big on esports because they just didn't know what esports were. But as soon as they start to figure out, well, for us, like when our esports team is doing better than the rest of our collegiate teams at the school, it kind of brings big bright eyes for people and they're like, what the heck? So that kind of brought more donors. And then second, you asked, may it be a way to sell an arena to the school? Definitely. So people who, of course, donors or alumni from your school or even big brand companies, like iBuyPower actually sponsors Robert Morris Arena. So that's having your arena sponsored by a big brand or someone is a lot more accessible at this point in time.
Yep.
It's fantastic. Scott, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I think this has been a fascinating talk. I think one of the interesting things for me, the biggest thing that came out of it is both the irony of how it's so much like some other athletic sports, and yet it's also so different. And I think that the other piece is that IT and AV have some role in it. But really, I would say we don't need to be any more experts than we do on a scoreboard in a gym or some of the audio in a gym, right? We give our consultation, we help out, but we have to do it at the needs that somebody like Glenn or Josh are giving us, rather than thinking that we know more than them. They're experts in this field, and listening to them and doing what they need is really what IT or AV organizations need to be doing.
I think my two takeaways on this right now, and I want to thank both of you for coming on and being part of this, was, first of all, I would have expected a different answer on where you thought this should live. Like, I would have expected it to be in the engineering or the IT departments. And having both of you say that you would rather have it live in athletics and be part of that same kind of structure, I think is amazing. I think it's great. The other big thing is, and I did think about this, was just how inclusive esports can be. It doesn't matter on the other end, where you are, who you are, you're, it's all about, how you play the game, really. I think that is a huge thing to take away from all of this. And I want to thank both of you for your time. It's amazing to me that these programs are coming up. I look forward to it. My son's a gamer. He's on all the time. He plays Overwatch and Fortnite. And so I think it's great.
Yeah, well, no, this was absolutely fantastic. I just want to thank you guys for this. I just sat back and learned. I mean, this was so fascinating to me. And I know the way this chat went off, again, it just crazy, the questions and seeing what people are doing. Can Josh, with you and Glenn, can you just tell people how they can get a hold of you? I get a feeling we have people who really have a lot of questions. So just let people know how the best way to get a hold should they want to continue to reach out.
Yeah, I can definitely drop my email and my phone number in the chat right now. So at any point in time, if you guys want to reach out to me, you may do so. And of course, I see Oakland University's in the chat. I'm actually from Michigan, and I'm going to be heading back there over the break. So if you guys want me to come stop on by, feel free to reach out. I'll do so.
Yeah, I just put my my contact information in the chat. I think, I don't mean to speak for Josh, but I think he would agree with what I'm about to say. You know, we owe a great debt to the people before us who helped bring us into this. And so there's a very strong pay it forward and pay it back kind of ethos among those of us who've started esports teams. So, you know, while we were the 6th team in the country, I had no idea what we were doing when we first started. I really didn't know where to begin. And, you know, I called Kurt Melcher at RMU because he was kind of the only guy doing it. And he spent hours with me helping us build that. And we do the same thing all the time. Like I host people, if you want to come to campus and see our arenas, if you want to get on a phone call, you know, you'll find that most of us who are running these kinds of programs are happy to spend as much time as you need, because we know this rising tide raises all ships. I mean, we're happy to contribute. This is not as competitive a space. It's weird. I mean, like, it's competitive in that our students compete, but the programs, at least at this point, are all pretty friendly. I mean, would you agree, Josh? I mean, like, we all kind of want to help each other, which is sort of, I think it's special, and it's certainly something that we're happy to throw out there to help anyone who wants it.
Yeah, definitely. Especially in my undergrad, getting ready, and I knew I wanted to be in esports. I had no idea really where to start, and I just study and study. And I called all these big universities that had programs, and they took the time out to actually speak to me as an undergrad student, which is very rare in many cases. So being able to have that, and now I can give it back. I probably talk to a high school esports program every single week that I'm working, which is kind of wild because I have my day job and then coaching the team, and making time for another high school team is also amazing at the same time. So
Yeah, high school is where the action is right now. Like,
definitely.
totally.
If you guys don't know about the High School Esports League or play Visa, I play Versus. I would highly recommend that you get into it. If you want more information on the High School Esports League, I actually work with those guys as well. So let me know, reach out to me, and I can definitely put you in contact with them. They do allow colleges to advertise on their Discords. So if you're looking for that recruitment piece, this is a place that you can go and seek players from.
And for non-gamers, Discord is just Slack, except for gamers.
Joe, sounds like you got some good podcast ideas.
I mean, seriously, this whole thing is going to keep the podcast going for the next, couple of years off of all this. So thank you guys so much. Everyone stay tuned. 15 minutes from now, we come back with vendor relationships, also known as how to get a free lunch. No, how to build those relationships with our vendors, because obviously if we are about to build these arenas, we're going to need some great relationships. So thank you guys, everyone. We'll see you all in about 15 minutes for the last session of the day.